go but have no idea what you need, or what these things are even called, or any idea where to start at all? Don't worry, I'm here to walk you through it. I'm Linda and welcome to Waldorf Wonder Things. To begin felting, there's only really 4 things that you need. First, you need felting needles, something to felt onto, some wool, and an idea for your project. So let's look at these things a little more closely. So the first thing you're going to need is a needle felting needle. You can't just use any old needle because these needles are completely smooth. You'll need a specific needle felting needle. The reason is they have these little notches in this part of the needle here. These little notches are called barbs, and this is what does the work of felting. The notches, or the barbs, catch the scales on the wool and they push them together. So the more you stab into the wool, the more the fibers come together into a solid form. You need to watch these needles because they are incredibly sharp. So be careful and watch your fingers. You can buy finger protectors for your thumb and your finger on the hand that holds your work or your wool. These are definitely not necessary, and many people, myself included, don't use them at all. So you can use your needles just like this. I do that quite often when I just want to do something very quickly. I'll just use it without any handle at all. Or you may find it more comfortable to purchase a handle like either of those. This is a single handle and this is a multi-tool handle. Okay, they work very simply. By this part here, it comes apart. The thinner end is the part that goes in first. So you just push your needle. You can replace these needles for whichever needle you prefer. Put it in, make sure this part is pointing to the center or it will get stuck here, and you just push it in until it sits firmly, and then you can work with this needle. This one works a little differently as it unscrews on the top here. So you can put your needles through here. This one holds 4 needles, and we just screw that back onto the top, and that will hold all 4 needles securely. This helps you to work 4 needles at one time so you can work faster. Now the needles come in different gauges. Generally about a 32 to a 40 you'd probably find pretty common in stores or online. The basic idea is the higher the number, the finer the needles. So you would use your 32 to do your heavy duty felting and your 40 to do finer detailed work. Needle felting needles also come in a variety of shapes. Most common you will find a triangle shape, a star shape, spiral, and perhaps even a reverse. It's really tricky for me to show you what these look like on the camera because the needles wouldn't show what shape they were. So I've drawn you a lovely picture to give you an idea of what these look like. Now this is triangular, 3 sides with the notches going down on the edges of the needle. This one's a star shape. There's 4 sides, and again the notch is going down. This one is a spiral shape. You can see that it spirals up to the top with the notches going along on the spirals. The reverse needle, the notches go in the opposite direction to the 3 other needles. So what's the difference between all of these needles? If you're doing some basic shaping work without much sculpting, or if you're doing flat work, it really wouldn't matter too much. I would probably go with a 38 or a 36, probably a star, but it wouldn't really matter too much which you picked up. But very briefly, triangular needles come in a gauge from 32 to 34. So your 32 and 36 would probably be for bulk work or attaching different pieces. We're talking about the triangular ones here. A 38's a general good all-rounder. A 40 would give you a nice neat surface, and a 42 would be used for attaching fine hairs or tiny wool wisps or other very fine work. Now in your star needles, you'll probably come in a 36 or a 38. A 36 will be good for quick work and joining things. And a 38, that's a good all-rounder, but it could be used for slightly finer work than if you had a triangular 38 needle. Spiral needles have barbs that twist around the needles, and this makes them felt quickly and also gives them a neat finish and minimizes the surface holes that you might get with the other needles. They're not very good for doing large amounts of bulk work. And then lastly, you have the reverse needles. So the barbs, as I said, go in the opposite direction, and this creates a nice fluffy finish to your work. The other thing to note is you may also find needles that are labeled small, medium or large. I tend to avoid these needles because they tend to break more easily and they don't felt as well, or for as long, and they tend to get blunt much easier and quicker than your needles that would be labeled in a gauge size. I just wanted to point out here, there are different parts on your needles. I'll just grab one of my needles here to help so we can see what it looks like. So this top bit here is called the crank. This part here is the shank. There's a little taper up part, the intermediate section. There's a taper down section. This section here is called the working part. And then we have the point. So as I said, it's not necessary for you to go out and buy a different size needle in every shape you can find. If you had a triangular or a star needle in a 38 or a 36, you could do a lot of beginner projects with that. If you wanted to start to do some finer work, maybe you could get a 40 needle and you could do a lot of projects with just those 3 needles. Now, how do we store needles? You may buy your needles and it comes with a little foam block like this, and you can just put it inside and put that in a safe place. You have to be careful because sometimes the needle comes through on the other side too. They also may come in a little bit of corrugated cardboard in a little plastic bag, and you can put them back inside and tuck them in and keep them with your other needles. What I like to do is keep them in a little tin all together. So I just put them inside and then I put on the lid, and I put this in my basket with all my wool roving or wool that I use for felting. Okay, so let's look at the mat. Here I have a foam block. I purchased this specifically for needle felting. If you buy a kit or find needle felting supplies in a store, you'll probably end up with a foam block just like this one. You can get them smaller, you can get them larger. I like this large size. It enables me to do bigger pieces, but also of course I can do smaller pieces on here as well. The foam blocks are good if you do a variety of different projects. You can do flat pieces, you can also work little 3D pieces as well, or even larger 3D pieces. You can all do it on your foam block. It is recommended to use a cover on these. This is to stop the wool from being felted into the block and having the foam stick to your work. But as you can see, and I'll show you the other side as well, as you can see, I don't often use a cover, and this means that my block will wear out faster and it'll probably need replacing much sooner. So you can use a variety of fabrics if you want to put a cover on yours. You can use linen, thick cotton, denim, hessian, or even wool sheets. It doesn't need to be 100% wool, so that's worth noting as well. You may have seen these little brush mats that you can get. They're mainly used if you want to do flat work, like working on a piece of felt. They're not used so much if you want to make little 3D things or even large 3D items. You can also get felt mats. You can see that this felt is quite thin. If you find a felt mat, they're normally about 5 millimeters thick. They're quite solid. You could do a lot of 3D work on that. I just find it harder to do the flat work on the felt mats. That's why I prefer the foam block. Also, if you do a lot of 3D work, you may want to consider either purchasing or making a little rice mat. If you imagine a large beanbag filled with rice, and they're really good for 3D work as well. Okay, let's talk a little bit about wool. Now, I guess the biggest question is, can you use any wool to do felting? The simple answer is yes, you can, but different kinds of wool are better for different kinds of projects. If you buy a kit, or if you go into a store that has needle felting supplies, you're most likely to come across colored wool in little balls like this. It'll probably be labeled wool roving or wool tops, carded wool roving, things like that. You might hear people use the words wool roving and wool tops interchangeably. There is a difference, but it's more important for wool spinners creating yarn than it is for people using the wool for needle felting. But very briefly, wool tops is usually smooth and the fibers are straight and they all lay in the same direction. It usually looks really sleek, perfect and uniform. But wool roving looks a little, I'd say this is wool roving. Wool roving looks fluffy and soft, sort of looks a little fuzzy here. You can tell that the fibers aren't going all in the same direction. It's generally not as smooth and as sleek as tops. Both usually come in little balls like this of the colored wool, and you can just unroll them just like this, and you just gently pull the wool out to start felting. What about all of these other wools that I have here? Okay, so this one here, if you can see, it's quite spongy and all of the fibers are going in every sort of direction. This is called wool batting. You might find this in sheets or generally in sheets or big pieces. This is really good as a core wool. It's almost like you have a head start with the felting. The fibers are already going in different directions. It's much easier to begin felting with this one. So if you're using this to sculpt a large piece, this might be the internal piece that you begin with. I know that I use these when I make doll heads or doll bodies that I'm needle felting. This is what I'd begin with. So we have our batting, our wool tops and our wool roving, which is normally coloured. These will form the finishing touches. I also here have, it's called wool locks, and it's really just raw wool that's been washed. This is undyed and these are dyed, and there are a lot of impurities which you can see in this wool. So this might be dirt or grass stains. It's also a bit greasier. I tend to use this as finishing touches on my pieces, things like hair or bits of grass or vine. I wouldn't use this as a core wool to begin needle felting. This is definitely just something you add at the end. I also have, now this is just what I would call clean carded wool. It's generally roving. Now I use this mostly as stuffing for dolls and toys. It can also be felted in the same way as the coloured wool roving or tops here. Now wool felt. Wool felt is great if you're doing a flat piece to begin with. I would always begin with wool felt. That's either commercially made or wet felted if I've made it myself. So I believe that's all of our wool. So the last thing I said you needed was an idea to begin. So my idea is I'm just going to show you how to make a little flower on a flat surface. It's very easy. So I'm going to take some of my wool roving. I'm going to twist it a little to get it a bit of a basic shape. See how I've moved it in this sort of shape? It's probably a bit big, so I'm just going to redo that. Now I'm going to take my needle and just follow it along in one section. Now it does look big and puffy right now, but I'm going to keep pushing this over to come together into the one area that I'm needle felting into. Just use my fingers to push it into the spot that I want it, and again on the other side, and then I will work on the top to get it in all in one spot. I've got extra wispy bits, I just bring them where I feel they needed and keep working into the same spots. Now, as I don't have a cover, this is what I meant as that it will get caught into your mat. So I gently just pull this off. You can see if I were to pull that quite quickly, this foam part would come off. So this is what it looks like on the back. Now we have the front, and I'm going to keep working a little bit. As I said, the more you work it, the more it comes into a solid form. So you want to be careful because these needles are very fragile and they do break easily. So when you stab into the wool, make sure you go in and out in the same angle. It's very important. You don't want to break it. If you break your needle, it's not too bad on a flat surface because it will just be broken through here. More like this, it'll break here and you'll just be able to pick it up. But if you're working on a 3D piece, it'll be very important for you to cut away at your work to retrieve the broken needle, especially if you're making a little toy for a child. You don't want to be giving them a toy that has a broken needle in it. Now you'd probably use snips or scissors to cut away your wool until you get the needle out, and then you can add more wool to that cutaway section to cover up where you've had to cut it. So I've got a little stem here. Now I'm going to add one little flower. So let's take some more wool. I'm just going to again give it a little basic shape. It's probably a bit too much, so let's halve that. Just rip it. hold it basically where I want it. And now I'm coming around in different areas. That's going to help spread out that wool. Now on this side, I still have these tufty bits. I can use that to connect it to the stem. I can also push it over and use it as more color on my little leaf here. Okay, so now I'm going to add a little circle in the middle as the middle of the flower. So I've created a little bit of a ball. Just going to put this over the top. Now to begin with, I'm just going to stab in a tiny, I'm imagining there's a circle here, and I'm just stabbing the wool in that little circle. So I'm just making sure I'm coming from all angles. As this is a nice little flat surface, I'm going to make it nice and round. Keep moving it. So as I said, the more you stab into it, the more it will felt. Now we can make little petals by doing very much the same thing. Just taking little bits of the wool roving, and I'm going to add them. I'm going to imagine there is a petal shape, and that's the shape that I'm going to be stabbing into. Okay, let's keep adding the rest of the petals. Again, I'm using this circular stabbing motion and imagining where I want this petal to look like, and I'm stabbing them down in that shape. That you probably want to start with a smaller amount of wool than you think you would need. It's easier to add wool. Sometimes it's harder to take wool away. And we'll do one last one on the other side. Now as a last little touch, I'm just going to show you how we can add something like the wool locks as a little final detail. So I'm just following the natural curve of this wool. Now I'd like to push these fibers up so I can see that. These ones down, these ones up and down. So the last thing I might like to do is just trim the little edges here so it is lined up. Now I will just work this area a bit more so these little fibers don't stick up. So now we have our little flower here, and that's a really simple design with basic shapes that you can use, showing you how very easy it is to get started with needle felting. So this is a flat piece. You may also like to try your hand at a little 3D piece, and I'll show you how to do a very basic ladybug. If you want to begin with some 3D work, you probably want to begin with something that has a very basic shape. So today I'm going to start with a tiny little ladybug. So the first thing I do is I'll take a piece of the black wool roving. I'm just going to roll this to give me a head start into a basic shape. Now I'm just going to take my needle and work from all directions into my little rolled up ball. Now what you want to do is keep in mind the shape that you're trying to create as you work your wool and with your needle. Now remember, I did say to insert your needle and wring it out on the same angle. You don't need to push very far, because remember this section here, that's the working part. So if you're pushing your needle all the way through, it's not very effective. You just need to push about 1 centimeter in. So you do want to work from all angles to make sure all of it's felted. Just remember, if you're also not using finger protectors, try to keep your fingers out of the way, because it does hurt if you stab them. So I've decided that this little section here is going to be the head. So I'm giving a little neck area so I can work on this little head here. So remember, when you're working, keep your idea of what you're trying to create in mind. Now this will be the body, so I'm just giving it some general shaping by just working over it. Now I'm going to add some red, obviously, because it can't be a ladybug if it's all black. So I'll add some red soon. Just finalizing this little head shape before I add the red. Now to add color, I'm just going to take our red color here. I'm going to fold it a couple of times so it gives me a nice uniform color. And I am just going to put it on the top and start felting that on. Remember, if you're not using a cover, to continue to lift your work so it doesn't felt to your mat. So I've just been pinching his poor little face. I'm just going to fix up that shaping. Now you can see I've got some red wispy bits here. I'm just going to push those back and continue to work them in. Now I haven't really done a very good coverage on this side, so all we're going to do now is take some more wool roving, roll it up again as we did before, and cover that section, and we continue to felt. As you can see, I'm still continuing to work on my shape and be mindful of the shape of my little ladybug as I work around. Now underneath, I still have my black through here, so I'm going to come along and do a bit more red coverage, just like we did before. Just bringing that color all together, placing it where it needs it, and then working it in. I tend to finish by doing the top part with another color because you can see I've worked some of this black through on the red here. So I just want to get one last little bit of red in a moment to cover that. I'm just finishing the bottom first, so I know I won't need to do that again. Now we're just going to put a little bit more cover on the top just to cover those little bits that came through. If you're wondering, I'm working with a triangular needle and its gauge is a 36. So as I said, that's a pretty general all-rounder. I'm not doing very detailed work, and I'm also not doing lots of bulky work here either though. It's quite a small piece. What I'm going to do is just work on a line down here a little bit. I'm imagining that's where the wings will go. In a second, I'm going to add some spots. Take my black, I'm going to keep a very thin line of it, just twist it so I can get that thin line, and then I'm going to work that onto the line, the little groove that I just created. Now I'm just going to take my time to very slowly work along that line. So now we've got this line here, just going to attach it on the bottom a little bit. Now our ladybug looks a little bit like this. So I'm going to add some spots. Now to add some very delicate spots, you just want a very fine amount of wool roving. I'm going to twist it into a little ball. When I attach it, I'm going to stab into the same spot. If I stab it into the same spot, it will create a little ball like this. So let's take another one on the other side. All I need is a couple of little strands, and I will just add it in the exact same spot by stabbing into one spot only. So I'm just going to go ahead now and add a few more spots in our ladybug, maybe 2 more on each side. Now the very last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add 2 little white spots for his eyes. So in exactly the same way as we added our spots on his body, that's how we're going to do the eyes. So now we have a little ladybug, and you might be wondering, what do I do with all of these wispy bits? I can't get them to go smooth. So the easiest way is just to take your scissors and give your little piece a little haircut. A little ladybug as a beginner project. I really hope you have enjoyed this tutorial today and me walking through all of the steps of beginner felting. I really hope that you give felting a go because it is so much fun and I think you'll enjoy it.
Thank you for watching, and if you found this video helpful, show your support by giving it a like. And if you'd like to stay updated with all of my new tutorials, please subscribe.